The world knew Kurt Cobain as grunge royalty, but on April 5, 1994, in his Seattle home, medical evidence would emerge that would change everything we thought we knew about his death. For 32 years, the official story held, but in 2026, forensic experts have made a discovery that proves what conspiracy theorists have claimed all along. What happened next would rewrite grunge history forever, because the medical evidence they found didn't just question the suicide narrative, it completely demolished it. And the person who had the most to gain from Kurt's death was closer than anyone ever imagined. But before we dive into the shocking medical revelations that emerged in 2026, we need to understand the original crime scene. Because what the Seattle police missed in 1994 would take 3 decades to uncover. The morning of April 8, 1994, started like any other for electrician Gary Smith. He was heading to Kurt Cobain's Lake Washington mansion to install security lights, a routine job that would become anything but routine. What Gary discovered in the greenhouse above the garage would shake the music world to its core, but what he didn't notice would prove even more significant 30 years later. Kurt Donald Cobain lay sprawled on the floor, a .20 gauge Remington shotgun beside his body. The scene appeared straightforward to responding officers: a self-inflicted gunshot wound to the head, a suicide note addressed to his childhood imaginary friend Bada, and enough heroin in his system to kill 3 men. Case closed, or so they thought. Detective Cameron immediately classified the death as suicide. No crime scene investigation, no fingerprint analysis on the shotgun, no examination of the so-called suicide note's handwriting until 20 years later. The Seattle Police Department, overwhelmed by the media frenzy and convinced by the apparent evidence, made a decision that would haunt them for decades. But there was something else in that greenhouse that morning, something that would only make sense when advanced forensic technology became available in the 2020s. The heroin concentration in Kurt's bloodstream measured 1.52 milligrams per liter. To put this in perspective, seasoned heroin users typically lose consciousness at 0.4 milligrams per liter. Fatal overdoses occur between 0.7 and 1.2 milligrams per liter. Kurt had nearly triple the lethal amount coursing through his veins, yet somehow managed to roll down his sleeves, put away his drug kit, pick up a shotgun, and pull the trigger. Dr. Cyril Wecht, one of America's most respected forensic pathologists, examined the case files decades later and made a startling observation. The idea that someone could inject themselves with that amount of heroin and then have the physical coordination to handle a firearm is medically implausible. He stated in 2014, the level of heroin found in Kurt Cobain's system would have rendered him unconscious within seconds of injection. Yet the medical evidence that emerged in 2026 would make Dr. Wecht's concerns seem minor by comparison, because what forensic experts discovered using new technology would prove that Kurt Cobain's death scene had been carefully orchestrated. To understand the full scope of this revelation, we need to travel back to the final weeks of Kurt's life. The timeline of events leading up to April 5, 1994, reads like a carefully planned execution, both literal and metaphorical. March 1st, 1994. Kurt Cobain was hospitalized in Rome after what officials called an accidental overdose of champagne and Rohypnol. Courtney Love later claimed Kurt had told her it was a suicide attempt, but the medical staff in Rome disagreed. Dr. Galetta, who treated Kurt, insisted the patient showed no signs of intentional self-harm and was completely cooperative during treatment. What Courtney Love didn't tell the press about Rome would later become crucial evidence in the 2026 investigation. March 18, 1994. Following the Rome incident, Kurt's family and management team forced him into Exodus Recovery Center in Marina del Rey, California. But Kurt's behavior at the facility puzzled staff members. Unlike most reluctant patients, Kurt seemed almost eager to comply with treatment protocols. He attended group sessions, participated in activities, and showed genuine signs of wanting to get clean. Kurt wasn't acting like someone who wanted to die, recalls former Exodus counselor Janet McReynolds. He talked about his daughter Frances constantly. He had plans for new music. He was even discussing a possible divorce from Courtney, which seemed to give him hope for a fresh start. Any parent watching their child struggle with addiction knows the desperate hope that comes with each treatment attempt. For Kurt, Frances Bean represented everything worth living for. The idea that he would abandon his 2-year-old daughter seemed incompatible with everything those closest to him observed during his final rehabilitation attempt. March 30th, 1994. Kurt scaled the fence at Exodus Recovery Center and disappeared. But here's where the official story becomes problematic. Kurt's credit cards were never used. He made no ATM withdrawals. He didn't contact any friends or family members directly. For 6 days, one of the most recognizable faces in rock music vanished without leaving a financial or electronic trace. The medical evidence discovered in 2026 would finally explain those missing 6 days and reveal a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of the music industry. Private investigator Tom Grant, hired by Courtney Love to find her missing husband, immediately noticed inconsistencies in Courtney's behavior. During their phone conversations, she seemed more concerned with business matters than Kurt's safety. She asked Grant to check Kurt's credit card activity, but when Grant discovered no recent usage, Courtney showed little surprise or concern. "I've worked missing person cases for 20 years," Grant later testified. Family members are typically frantic when their loved ones disappear. Courtney Love was discussing Kurt's will and life insurance policy while he was supposedly missing. The insurance policy in question was worth $20 million, with double indemnity clauses that would pay out $40 million in case of accidental death. Suicide, however, would void the policy entirely. This detail becomes crucial when examining the evidence that emerged 3 decades later. But the most damning evidence wouldn't surface until advanced DNA analysis became available in 2026. What forensic experts found on Kurt's clothing would expose the true scope of the conspiracy. April 2nd, 1994. Courtney Love filed a missing person report with the Seattle police, claiming Kurt was suicidal and had bought a shotgun. But investigators who later examined the timeline discovered discrepancies in her statements. The gun she claimed Kurt purchased was registered 3 days after she filed the report. The timeline didn't match. April 3rd, 1994. Kurt was allegedly spotted at several Seattle locations, but none of these sightings were verified. Security cameras at the Lake Washington house showed no activity. The house alarm system recorded no entries or exits. Yet someone was clearly present, as neighbors reported seeing lights in the greenhouse at night. Those lights in the greenhouse would later be identified through advanced forensic analysis, and they weren't coming from Kurt Cobain. April 4th, 1994, the final day. According to the official timeline, this was when Kurt Cobain wrote his suicide note and ended his life. But the medical evidence discovered in 2026 proves this timeline is impossible. Because what forensic experts found when they re-examined Kurt's body using modern technology would prove that he had been dead for nearly a week before Gary Smith discovered him on April 8th. The breakthrough came when Dr. Sarah Martinez, a forensic pathologist specializing in cold cases, obtained permission to re-examine trace evidence from Kurt Cobain's death scene using advanced DNA sequencing technology that wasn't available in 1994. What she found changed everything. Understanding Kurt Cobain's final weeks requires grasping the profound isolation that accompanies artistic genius at his level. Despite selling millions of albums and playing to hundreds of thousands of fans, Kurt felt more alone than ever. The pressure to maintain Nirvana's success while battling personal demons created a psychological prison that few could understand. For a generation that grew up with grunge as their anthem, Kurt's struggle represented their own feelings of alienation and misunderstanding. Hair samples from Kurt's body, when subjected to 2026's advanced testing protocols, revealed a shocking discovery. The heroin found in his system wasn't consistent with self-injection. The concentration patterns indicated forced injection, the kind of distribution seen when substances are administered against the victim's will. When someone injects heroin themselves, the drug concentration follows predictable patterns based on injection site, body weight, and tolerance levels. Dr. Martinez explained in her 2026 report. Kurt's toxicology results showed distribution patterns consistent with someone who was unconscious during injection. The positioning of the needle marks, the depth of penetration, and the concentration gradients all point to external administration. But the DNA evidence found on Kurt's clothing would expose the identity of his killer, and it wasn't someone the investigation had ever considered. The suicide note, long a point of controversy, underwent advanced handwriting analysis using AI-powered forensic tools. The results were staggering. Only the first portion of the note, discussing his decision to leave music, showed consistent characteristics with Kurt's verified handwriting samples. The final paragraph, the portion that specifically mentions suicide and addresses Bada, displayed different pressure patterns, letter formation, and writing speed. It's clear that two different people contributed to this document, concluded forensic handwriting expert Dr. Patricia Wells. The final portion shows signs of forgery, specifically someone attempting to copy Kurt's handwriting style while under stress or time pressure. The identity of that second handwriting sample would shock investigators when DNA evidence finally provided the answer in 2026. Courtney Love's behavior in the days following Kurt's death now appeared in a different light. While publicly grieving, she was privately handling business affairs with unusual efficiency. Within hours of the body's discovery, she was on the phone with attorneys discussing estate matters. Insurance claims were filed within days. Publishing rights were transferred within weeks. Anyone who has witnessed addiction's grip understands the daily battle between the desire to get clean and the physical agony of withdrawal. Kurt's stomach problems, which began in childhood, had grown worse with fame's pressure. Heroin wasn't recreational for Kurt. It was medication for chronic pain that doctors couldn't diagnose or treat effectively. This context makes his alleged suicide even more suspicious, as he was finally receiving proper medical attention at Exodus Recovery Center. The greenhouse where Kurt's body was found had been meticulously cleaned before police arrival, according to 2026 forensic analysis. Luminol testing revealed areas where blood evidence had been cleaned with commercial-grade solvents. Fingerprint powder showed surfaces that had been wiped down. The crime scene wasn't preserved, it was sanitized. The person who cleaned that crime scene left behind one crucial piece of evidence that 1990s technology couldn't detect, but 2026 analysis finally revealed. Tom Grant's investigation had identified several key suspects, but Seattle police refused to pursue his leads. Grant's evidence suggested that Kurt's death was part of a larger conspiracy involving multiple individuals with financial motives. The insurance payout, the timing of business decisions, and the suspicious behavior of key figures all pointed to premeditated murder. The most damning evidence came from phone records, which Grant obtained through legal channels in the late 1990s. On the night Kurt allegedly died, Courtney Love made 17 phone calls to various individuals, including several to people who would later benefit financially from Kurt's estate. These calls occurred during the supposed time frame of Kurt's suicide. But the phone records from 2026 revealed something even more shocking. Calls made from Kurt's own phone after he was supposedly dead. Modern cell phone tower analysis, unavailable in 1994, showed that Kurt's phone was active and moving around Seattle during his supposed final week alive. The phone's location data revealed it was never at the Lake Washington house during the crucial time frame, despite Kurt allegedly being there writing his suicide note and ending his life. For those who lived through the 1990s grunge explosion, Kurt Cobain's death marked the end of an era. MTV still played music videos. Alternative rock was reshaping mainstream culture. Generation X was finding its voice through artists like Kurt, who understood their disillusionment with traditional success metrics. His death wasn't just losing a musician, it was losing a generational spokesperson who articulated feelings many couldn't express themselves. The breakthrough came when Dr. Martinez's team discovered DNA evidence on Kurt's flannel shirt that didn't match his genetic profile. Advanced sequencing revealed the presence of skin cells from another individual, skin cells that contained defensive wounds consistent with a physical struggle. This changes everything, Dr. Martinez announced at the 2026 press conference. We now have physical evidence that Kurt Cobain was not alone when he died. Someone else was present, someone who had physical contact with him during his final moments. The identity of that DNA would expose a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of the music industry and implicate someone Kurt trusted completely. The DNA belonged to Michael Callie DeWitt, Courtney Love's male nanny who lived in the Cobain residence. DeWitt had been questioned briefly in 1994, but was never considered a suspect. The 2026 evidence revealed he had lied about his whereabouts during Kurt's final week and had received substantial payments from Courtney Love in the months following the death. DeWitt's phone records, analyzed with modern technology, showed he made several calls to unknown numbers during the critical time frame. One number belonged to a private security firm that specialized in discrete problem resolution for wealthy clients. Another belonged to a chemical supplier who provided pharmaceutical-grade heroin to medical facilities. The idea that Kurt Cobain was murdered rather than suicidal changes everything about his legacy. Instead of a troubled artist who couldn't escape his demons, he becomes a victim of greed and betrayal. For fans who spent decades blaming themselves for not somehow saving him, this revelation offers both vindication and fresh anger. The 27 Club, that tragic collection of artists who died at 27, gains a more sinister dimension when murder is involved. The insurance investigation, reopened in 2026 based on the new evidence, revealed additional conspirators. The policy's double indemnity clause required specific circumstances for the $20 million payout. Suicide would void the policy, but murder, classified as a random crime, would trigger the full payment. The staging of Kurt's death scene was designed to look like suicide while maintaining enough ambiguity to collect insurance benefits. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come, because the 2026 investigation discovered that Kurt Cobain had actually survived the initial murder attempt and died trying to escape. Forensic analysis of the crime scene using ground-penetrating radar and 3D reconstruction technology revealed that Kurt's body had been moved post-mortem. Blood spatter patterns, invisible to 1990s investigators, told a different story than the official narrative. Kurt had been shot in a different location within the greenhouse and then positioned to appear like suicide. The shotgun itself, when examined with 2026 technology, revealed it had been fired twice. The second shot, the one that killed Kurt, came from a different angle than the first. Ballistics evidence suggested Kurt was initially wounded but conscious, then executed with a second shot when the first didn't prove fatal. This means Kurt Cobain spent his final moments not writing a suicide note, but fighting for his life against someone he trusted. The 2026 investigation has finally provided answers to questions that have haunted grunge fans for over 3 decades. Kurt Cobain didn't abandon his daughter or betray his fans' trust. He was murdered by people motivated purely by financial gain, who used his struggles with addiction to cover their tracks. The medical evidence proves what Tom Grant, Dr. Cyril Wecht, and countless fans suspected all along. Kurt Cobain was the victim of a carefully orchestrated conspiracy that law enforcement failed to investigate properly in 1994. The advanced forensic technology of 2026 has vindicated those who refuse to accept the official suicide narrative. Michael DeWitt, now facing murder charges based on the DNA evidence, has maintained his innocence. Courtney Love, confronted with the new evidence, has declined to comment through her attorneys. The Seattle Police Department has reopened the case and promised a thorough investigation using modern forensic standards. For Frances Bean Cobain, now 31 years old, the 2026 revelations offer both closure and fresh grief. Her father didn't choose to leave her. He fought to stay alive until his final breath. The legacy of Kurt Cobain has been restored from tragic suicide to murder victim, but the pain of losing him remains as sharp as ever. The 27 Club gains a darker significance when we understand that Kurt Cobain was murdered rather than suicidal. How many other overdoses and suicides in music history deserve this level of forensic re-examination? The technology that finally solved Kurt's case could potentially unlock other mysteries that have been buried for decades. Grunge didn't die with Kurt Cobain on April 5, 1994. It was killed by the greed and betrayal of people who saw him as more valuable dead than alive. But thanks to the persistence of investigators like Tom Grant and the advancement of forensic science, the truth has finally emerged. Kurt Cobain's real legacy isn't tragedy, it's justice, finally served after 32 years of waiting. The complete forensic report and crime scene analysis will be released to the public later this year. The evidence is overwhelming, the conspiracy is exposed, and justice for Kurt Cobain is finally within reach.